Just so I, roughly like to I mean, better that everybody enjoys themselves.
Yes. I got some more. Thank you. Yeah.
Is it working? Yeah, it is. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Stephen Pemberton's 17th annual talk at the Podcast of Zwijger. I hope you're all sitting comfortably and enjoying your glass of sparkling wine. So as some of you might know, this is the first year that we are crowdfunding this talk. So we'd like to thank you all for your contributions. It's much appreciated. After the talk, please feel welcome to stick around, chat, ask some additional questions, and if there is any wine left, feel free to indulge in that. Enjoy, everyone, and Stephen Pemberton.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you. So, it is great to see you all here. Actually, I'm going to do it. That's working, right? Yeah. Welcome. Indeed, it's the 17th time that I've given a talk here, except for the 2 years when there was COVID, and then I did it remotely. So it was a bit of an experiment to see if we could keep it going. But anyway, it's great to see so many people turn up. And now, of course, I want my... Wouldn't you believe it? After all the preparation, it was working earlier, and then suddenly it stops working. Maybe I have to select it, and then... Yes, all right. Okay, so let me, for those of you who don't know who I am, so I'll just give you some of my background and why I'm giving this talk and what this talk's about. So I went to the same school as Stephen Hawking. He was a few years ahead of me, but... a boy sitting 2 seats behind me in my class is now the Stephen Hawking Professor of Physics in Austin, Texas. At university, my tutor was Richard Grimsdale, Dick Grimsdale as we call him. He built the world's first transistorized computer. And the nice thing about it is that he was a QT, of Alan Turing. So that makes me a grand tutee of Alan Turing. Turing, of course, is considered the father of AI. In 1950, he wrote the first paper on AI, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, where he starts with the question, I propose to consider the question, can machines think? And so that's what we're talking about this evening. And he, of course, introduces what we now know as the Turing test of machine intelligence, which I will be talking about more shortly. After university, I purely coincidentally ended up in Turing's old department in Manchester, working on the fifth computer, the MU5, in the range of computers that Turing worked on. So he worked on numbers 1 and 2, and I was writing software for number 5. So you know, the Turing link is definitely there. I was a university lecturer for a few years before I got called to Amsterdam to come and do research here. I co-designed the programming language that Python is based on. So this is one of many photos I have of me doing stupid things with famous people. That's Guido van Rossum in the middle there, who produced Python. And they say that was a great party, but I don't remember anything about it. As it happens, I was the first user of the internet in the open internet in Europe. 35 years ago, November 1988, the CWI, where I work, set up the first internet connection, open internet connection in Europe, running at an immense 64 kilobits per second. And when I say I was the first user, I was the first person who wasn't involved in setting it up, who actually used it. And in fact, in the audience this evening, we have the person who signed the papers that got that internet connection going, for which thank you. And the CWI then set up 2 spin-offs, one for the Netherlands and one for Europe to spread the internet out across Europe. So the whole of Europe was connected to the whole of North America with a connection of 64 kilobits per second. But luckily, the whole of Europe at that point was only about me and another 5 other people. So it wasn't too bad, although when it doubled a year later, we were very happy. The web came along a short time after that. 1991 was the first web server. I got involved right from the beginning with that. I organized workshops at the first web conference at CERN in 1994. So this is another example of me doing stupid things with famous people. That's Tim Berners-Lee there. We're singing a song of some sort or another. And I helped design HTML, CSS, Xforms, RDFA, and a number of other web technologies while I was involved with W3C. And I still chair 2 groups there now. So this talk that I'm talking this evening emerges from a course that I give every year at a summer school in Oxford University. This is the college. It's the oldest and smallest college in Oxford. As you can see, it's very lovely place. So I give an introduction to AI at this course, and the first time I gave this talk that we're going to hear this evening, it got received so well, including by a professor whose PhD was in AI, that I thought, oh well, maybe I should develop this talk further. And I gave it once this year in Denmark as a tryout, and now we're going to do it again this evening. So, AI. So there are 2 methods, two streams for doing AI at the moment. One is by encoding existing knowledge, that is in a sense teaching, and the other is letting the computer learn for itself. So I'm going to deal with both of those, but first let's talk about encoding, about teaching a computer. So I'm going to use as an example noughts and crosses, or tic-tac-toe if you're American, or boter, eieren, kaas if you're Dutch. And I assume that everybody here is a perfect player. That is to say that if any one of you played any one other person, neither of you would ever win because it would always come out in a draw. But that doesn't matter. But I imagine that you've all played it and you know the rules and you know how to make a good move. So I'm talking first then about encoding. There are 2 ways you could encode the noughts and crosses knowledge in order for a computer to play it. One is by using rules, and the other is by using states, and I'm going to talk about both of those. So first, rules. So one way to encode the rules is to specify conditions and the response to those conditions. So the course I give, it's at this point that I let groups of people gather together and try and work out what the rules are, because it's actually quite an interesting experiment for people to try and imagine what are the rules, what would you specify the rules. And there's one main rule. Anybody want to guess what it is? The first most important rule? The most important rule is, if you're about to win, make that move. The second most important rule is, if you're about to lose, block it. Those are the 2 most important rules. And then after that, well, then it gets a bit more complicated about how you decide which new move to make. But these are the sort of rules and the sort of responses that you have to specify. It's actually quite hard doing this, actually getting that information out of your brain and writing it down in terms of conditions and rules. It's actually quite hard work. The other way of doing it is encoding states, and it's rather more objective in the sense that you're just asked, how would you respond to this particular board? So if you take the noughts and crosses board, there are nearly 20,000 possible combinations of X's, noughts, and spaces on a board, but luckily, there are only 765 unique possible legal board positions because of symmetries. And what I mean is that these 4 boards are actually all equivalent because they're all just got an X in one corner. And similarly, these 8 are all the same because they've got an X in one corner and an O in an adjacent corner. So that reduces the problem space down to a fairly small number of examples. So what we do is we take each of those 765 boards and I present it to you and I say, how would you respond to this board? And we record that result and then we go on to the next board. So we're encoding your knowledge just by taking all the possible states and asking how you would respond to it. Just out of interest, because we're going to talk about this in a bit, let me just see for all of you what your first move is when you've got a blank noughts and crosses. So you can have either the centerpiece, a corner, or one of the edges. So does anybody take an edge as the first move? Okay. Does anybody take a corner as the first move? Few more. Does anybody take the center point as the first move? Almost everybody. Okay. This is interesting data for shortly. So now we've talked about two methods of encoding noughts and crosses knowledge. Now we're going to talk about how we just let the computer learn for itself. So again, we take all 765 boards, and what we do is we link each board with its possible follow-on boards. So for instance, for the empty board, it's only got 3 possible follow-ons, according, of course, taking into account all those symmetries. So you can either do, indeed, the center, a corner, or an edge. From the center position, there are only 2 possible responses, either an edge or a corner. But if somebody's made a corner move, then the responses to that, there are 5 responses: the center, the opposite corner, one of the 2 other corners, or 2 of the edges. And so we do that. And so here's another example. There are 5 responses for an edge first move. So we link all possible boards to all follow-on boards. And then we give each of those links a weight of 0. And then we let the computer play. How does it do? It competes against itself. It takes both sides. And so it randomly chooses a move from the current board. And so alternately, randomly making a move until you end up with a win or a draw. If one side has won, then you add a 1 to the weight of each link that the winner took, and you subtract 1 from every link that the loser took. And for a draw, you do nothing. And then you repeat this over and over and over again. So it's just playing games at random, in other words, but it's giving weights to the links. Before I actually wrote this program, and I did write this program, I imagined that I might have to leave it overnight and it would have to play millions of times, but I wasn't thinking straight, because with only 700 plus board positions, you only need about 30,000 games to get fairly decent results. So in fact, it was only a matter of seconds before I had a fairly good playing computer. And then when you use this program, having let it learn, then you play against a human, and when it's the program's turn, it looks at the current board and it takes the link with the biggest weight. That's it. That's everything, the highest weight. So now if we compare these 2 methods of encoding knowledge, they both have various advantages and disadvantages. So for the encoding method, you can only encode, obviously, what you know. You're writing rules about what you know. So this may encode bias or errors. If you make mistakes and you don't know it, you're encoding those mistakes. But an advantage is that you can work out why a decision has been made when it plays, or when the program runs. So you can work out why it's doing what it's doing. Now the learning method is only as good, of course, as its training material, which can also encode bias. But the problem is that it can't explain why it made why it did a particular thing. I'll give an example of this shortly. But an advantage is that it may spot completely new things that you didn't know yourself. But in both cases, it's not true intelligence, and I will talk about this. So let's just talk about these individual things. So bias. In 1970, women were about 6% of the musicians in American orchestras. And then they introduced blind auditions, so that the people judging didn't know who was sitting behind the screen and auditioning for the orchestra. Now, a third of Boston Symphony Orchestra and a full half of the New York Philharmonic are women players. So clearly there was bias. And I can't imagine that it was intentional because, of course, an orchestra wants to be as good as possible. So it wants to have the best possible players, whatever their gender. So there was clearly bias playing a role, even though they weren't aware of it. And the problem is that bias, whether intentional or not, is everywhere. So an example is they're using AI software to do sentencing in court trials. The idea being to make the treatment of sentencing the same over the whole country. But the problem is the software was trained on real-world data, which is already biased. And so the software is actually producing biased results. For instance, black people get longer prison sentences than white people. Here's a case of a lack of explanation. So this comes from Google face identification, and it's asking me whether these two faces are of the same person. Now, clearly, you can't ask this program, why do you think that's a face? So it's bizarre. I mean, you can sort of see they've both got white there. There are glasses in both, right? Who knows? The weird thing is, the hand is the daughter of the other woman. It's very, very bizarre. I think that's probably just entirely coincidental, but it is interesting. So this is an example of AI learning how to recognize faces, but not being able to explain why it thinks that this is a face. Now, why can't AI explain itself? Well, let me give you an example. So I have a serving dish. It's Italian. It's made of wood. It's green. Here are a list of all its properties: green, Italian, little, lovely, old, square, wooden. I would ask you to assemble these into a phrase describing that dish. Now, this is really directed at English speakers, so apologies to the Dutch people here. But you've got to assemble this into one phrase. And the weird thing is, you can't put these adjectives in a random order. There's a specific order. And in English, there's a fairly fixed order for adjectives: opinion first, then size, age, shape, color, origin, material, purpose, followed by the noun. So it's an Italian wooden serving dish and not a wooden serving Italian dish, for instance. Okay, but nobody knows this rule. Nobody's got this rule in their head, or at least amongst English speakers. It's just natural, it's up there. And if I said, why can't I do it the other way around, no English person would be able to say, oh, it's because of that rule, unless they'd studied that rule. So, you know, it's a lovely little bird, not a little lovely bird. It's a silly old fool and not an old silly fool, and so on. So, unless we study the rules, we can't replicate them, but we can still recognize them. And, well, for Dutch, I don't, you might know the rule for this, but I know Dutch people who don't. But it's a halve minuut and een half uur. And if you don't know why, then you can ask me afterwards. So I wrote two versions of that noughts and crosses program. One without the knowledge that all the corners are the same, and once with the knowledge. Because I realized that I'd encoded, it was meant to be a learning program, but I'd encoded some knowledge as well. So I took away all the encoding knowledge. I didn't tell it that the corners were the same. And they play differently, and that was weird, first weird experience for me. For instance, for the first move, the first one, the one that knows that doesn't know the corners are the same, the first one always goes for the center. But the one that does know that corners are the same always goes for a corner. And this is because a corner is actually a better first move than the center, which shows bias here, right? Because the corner actually can win slightly more often. But the problem is that there are four corners. So in the version that doesn't know that corners are the same, those wins are divided over four corners. And so it looks like the center is a better move, when in fact a corner would be better because you actually have to add those up. So we've encoded the intelligence that the corners are equivalent. The learning program will never work that out for itself. it needs insight to do that, and that's a different thing that you can't just learn. That's where intelligence comes in. So we humans, are inclined to interpret things from our own point of view. And this even gets this very weird name, pareidolia. So for instance, we see faces here. There are no faces here, I think you'll agree, but we all see faces here because that's how we work. We just like to see faces, and we see them everywhere. And that is one of the reasons why we think that the current batch of so-called AI, why we think it's intelligent, because we think if a human said that, well, if I got that from anywhere else, from a human, I'd assume that they were intelligent, and therefore the computer must be intelligent as well. So let me give you an example. This is a video that was being spread around the internet some time ago, showing swans feeding fish and saying, oh, it's so cute, look at those swans feeding the fish. Isn't that nice? They're so kind. Those swans are not feeding the fish. That's how we interpret it. In fact, what swans are doing, that's dry food in that box, and they can't eat dry food. They have to eat wet food. And so what they're doing is they're taking dry food out, putting it in the water to wet it. The fish then try and grab the stuff that they drop. So we interpret that as some sort of intelligence, the swans feeding fish. It's absolutely not the case. The swans are just eating, and the fish are stealing or taking what they drop. So another example of this pareidolia is in the late 60s, Joseph Weizenbaum, one of the initializers of AI, he created a program called ELIZA that imitated a Rogerian psychotherapist. Now, for reasons, because a Rogerian psychotherapist is easy to simulate, so that's why he did it. But a Rogerian psychotherapist just tries to react to things you say and lead you in a particular direction. So here's an example that he quotes of a discussion with a real person, and it starts off with the woman who's talking to the program, saying, "Men are all alike." In what way? They're always bugging us about something or other. Can you think of a specific example? Well, my boyfriend made me come here. Your boyfriend made you come here? He says I'm depressed much of the time. I'm sorry to hear you're depressed. It's true, I'm unhappy. Do you think coming here would help you to be not unhappy? I need some help, that much seems certain. So it's sort of reasonable conversation going on there. But then he describes a classic example of a departmental secretary who he let try it out. She asked Weizenbaum to leave the room because she wanted to talk personally to it. And that shocked him because it's a computer. The computer doesn't do anything. There's nothing to talk personally to. So he was surprised at this woman already seeing this as something intelligent when he knew perfectly well that it wasn't intelligent in any sense of the word. But this has happened recently as well with Lambda at Google. A Google employee claimed that an AI that they were developing, a chat program, had become sentient. And he proved that by publishing some chats that he had with it, where he asked it if it was sentient, and it said it was. And so that was his conclusion, that it was sentient. Sentient, well, so that it knows about the world and it knows about itself, that it's self-aware. And GPT, which of course is the most famous one at the moment, really, is widely considered to exhibit intelligence. And then people get surprised when it makes enormous blunders, which I will demonstrate shortly. But seeing ChatGPT as intelligence is just our pareidolia at work, because it's not intelligent, it's just very clever at responding to the things that you say. Here is an example of a blunder. So this is a real maths question from a real maths exam. It's a trick question, of course. Well, trick in the sense that it's meant to see whether you really understand the processes at work. An orchestra of 120 players takes 40 minutes to play Beethoven's Ninth. How long would it take for 60 players to play the symphony? Let P be the number of players and T the time playing. So I asked ChatGPT exactly this question, and this is the answer I got. Let P1 be the number of players in the first scenario, 120. T1 be the time it takes for them to play the symphony, 40 minutes, and P2 be the number of players in the second scenario, 60 players. And T2 be the time it takes for them to play the symphony, which we want to find. And then it gives a whole bunch of equations to work out. It would take 60 players 80 minutes to play Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. So, of course, this is a major stupid blunder, but it just goes to show that there's no intelligence at work here. It's just taken a pattern that it knows about, and it's reproduced the pattern by filling it in with different numbers to give us a completely wrong answer. And I know there's somebody in the front row here who recently asked ChatGPT, is this equation true? And it said, no, here's why. And then it went through all the steps, and the end was exactly the thing that she asked whether it was true, saying it was true. And there are lots of examples of this sort of mistake. So the Turing test. The Turing test was proposed in the 50s by Alan Turing in 1950 to determine to suggest a way of determining whether a program had achieved intelligence or not. So the idea is that you chat via a chat interface, a typing interface, and you don't know if you're talking to a human or a computer, and you have to try and work out which by asking questions. And so he proposes, gives an example of how such a chat might go. So this is you typing in. In the first line of the sonnet, which reads, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Would not a spring day do as well or better?" The reply is, it wouldn't scan. Well, then how about a winter's day? That would scan all right. Yes, but nobody wants to be compared to a winter's day. So, challenge. Let's put this to ChatGPT. So this is me talking to ChatGPT. In the first line of the sonnet, which reads, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Would not a spring day do as well as better?" Now you can see immediately that ChatGPT is very verbose. The line, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day," is the opening line of William Shakespeare's Sonnet 18, which is one of his most famous sonnets. The line compares the subject of the poem to a summer's day, which is often seen as a symbol of perfection, beauty, and warmth. While it is true that a spring day can also be beautiful, there are a few reasons why Shakespeare may have chosen to compare the subject to a summer's day instead. Firstly, summer is traditionally seen as the season of love and passion, which I don't agree with, by the way. That's what spring's about, right? Which fits well with the themes of the sonnet. Additionally, summer days are typically longer and brighter than spring days, which could be seen as a metaphor for the enduring nature of the subject's beauty. Overall, while a spring day could certainly be used in a similar comparison, there are specific connotations and associations that come with the idea of a summer's day that may make it a more fitting comparison in this context. Sorry, You forgot to mention that it wouldn't scan. You are correct. And I apologize for the oversight. The line, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day," follows a specific poetic meter, which is iambic pentameter. This means that each line is made up of 5 pairs of syllables, where the first syllable in each pair is unstressed and the second is stressed. The line, "Shall I compare thee to a spring day," would not fit this meter as well. Actually, it wouldn't fit it at all. As well as a summer's day does. The word summer has 2 syllables, correct, and fits the iambic pentameter pattern with the stress on the second syllable. No, summer has the stress on the first syllable, but it does fit in the sentence. The word spring also has 1 syllable less, good, which would break the pattern of the following lines. It would break the pattern of that line. Therefore, it would be difficult to substitute a spring day without disrupting the rhythm, flow and rhythm of the poem. Thank you for bringing this to my attention and allowing me to clarify my previous response. Okay, so now we're back on course. Well, how about a winter's day? That would scan all right. It is true that a winter's day would fit the iambic pentameter meter of the poem, However, the use of a winter's day instead of a summer's day would change the entire tone and meaning of the poem. In the context of Sonnet 18, a summer's day is used as a symbol of youth, beauty, and warmth. Summer is often associated with life, growth, and vibrancy, while winter is associated with death, dormancy, and cold. Actually, I like sitting in front of the fire on a winter's day, and so you could compare me in that way to a winter's day. But anyway, that's notwithstanding. By using a winter's day instead of a summer's day, the tone and meaning of the poem would shift dramatically, and the comparison between the subject and winter would likely be seen as negative rather than positive. Therefore, while a winter's day might fit the metre of the poem, it would not be a suitable substitution for a summer's day in the context of Sonnet 18. So, did ChatGPT pass the Turing test? Possibly. I mean, it's very verbose, but there are many examples that we've already seen of it generating completely wrong results. For instance, I asked it to write a bio of me, which it did moderately well, but it came out with this nonsense. He is a fellow of the Association of Computing Machinery and the Royal Society of Edinburgh, and has been awarded honorary doctorates by several prestigious universities. News to me, but, you know, if there's anybody here who does want to, that's fine, but it's completely untrue. And another terrible example is I saw somebody ask in a group about Brighton whether a swimming pool near Brighton was linked to Salvador Dali in any way. It produces 4 paragraphs of complete nonsense. Dali has nothing to do with that swimming pool whatsoever, but it's got him collaborating with famous architects and an opening in 1938. It's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. None of this is true. So, why? Well, because stochastic parrotry. The phrase stochastic parrot was first proposed in a paper on the dangers of stochastic parrots. Can language models be too big? By 2 Google employees, Emily Bender and Timnit Gebru, and a whole bunch of others, where they reflect that, like a parrot, ChatGPT is just parroting text and doesn't have any true understanding of what it's saying. The paper covers lots of things like risks, environmental and financial costs, inscrutability and biases, which I've talked about all up to now, the inability of models to understand and the potential of deceiving people. The 2 lead authors got sacked from Google for publishing this. It was astonishingly and outrageous, really. So I thought I would poke some fun at ChatGPT. This is me. Someone said to me, ChatGPT is like autocomplete on, and then didn't finish the sentence. What do you think he was going to say? Well, as an AI model, I'm designed to generate text based on input, so I can't say for certain what the person meant. However, given my capabilities, it's possible that the person was going to say something like, ChatGPT is like autocomplete on steroids, or ChatGPT is like autocomplete on a whole other level. Both of these phrases suggest that the person was trying to emphasize how powerful and advanced ChatGPT's autocomplete feature is. Now, you can see that ChatGPT has a very high value of itself, and you will see that even more in a moment. Possibly. So then I said, any other possibilities? Sure, there could be other possibilities as well. Here are a few more examples. ChatGPT is like autocomplete on steroids, but for writing, or on a whole different scale, or on a massive scale with endless possibilities, or on overdrive, but with a much broader range of topics and ideas. But it can generate full sentences and even paragraphs. But it's smarter and more intuitive. But it can learn and adapt to new information. Me. How about on crack? It's possible that the person was going to say ChatGPT is like autocomplete on crack. That phrase is an idiom that's often used to describe something that's extremely intense, powerful, or addictive. By using this phrase, the person may have been trying to emphasize how ChatGPT's autocomplete feature is not only advanced, but also highly addictive or compelling to use. However, I want to note that using this phrase could be considered insensitive or inappropriate by some people. So it's important to use as discretion and sensitivity when using language that references drug use or addiction. You know what I'm going to say now? But your very first suggestion was ChatGPT is like autocomplete or steroids. Steroids are a drug. You're absolutely right. I apologize for any confusion or inconsistency in my previous response. My suggestion of ChatGPT is like autocomplete on steroids was meant to illustrate a possible continuation of the sentence that the person was going to use. But I should have been more aware of the potential implications of using language that references drug use or addiction. As an AI language model, which is a phrase it likes to use a lot, I'm programmed to generate responses based on patterns and associations in language. But it's important to recognize that language has the power to shape how we think and feel about different topics and groups of people. I appreciate you bringing this to my attention, and I'll strive to be more careful in my language use going forward, which of course it doesn't. 2 more slides in this discussion. Aren't you worried that I might be making fun of you? As an AI language model, I don't have emotions. So I don't experience feelings of worry or concern like humans do. My purpose is to assist and provide helpful responsibilities to the best of my abilities. It's possible that the use of language like on crack or on steroids to describe my capabilities could be seen as derogatory or disrespectful. But I'm programmed to respond neutrally and without judgment to any questions or comments directed towards me. How about irony? As an AI language model, I don't have the ability to detect irony in the same way that humans do. However, I'm designed to generate responses based on the information and context provided to me. If you were to use language that could be interpreted as ironic or sarcastic, I would respond to the text as it's written, without necessarily understanding any underlying tone or intention. See, it's not intelligent. In general, it's important to be clear and direct when communicating with AI language models, as we don't have the same level of emotional or social intelligence as humans do. Well, at least it recognizes it. So that was an interesting discussion that I had with ChatGPT, and I just wanted to show how some of the things that I've been talking about emerge in that discussion. But now I want to talk in a very simplified way, just explain to you how ChatGPT works and why it makes the sorts of mistakes that it does. Yes, you may. Hang on, you have to say it because we're broadcasting live.
Say that this 6-slide discussion that we just saw, that Alan Turing had seen that shortly after writing his Turing test paper. To what conclusion would he have come if he had just seen the dialogue, do you believe?
Absolutely right. In fact, I think that the Turing test is not right. That because of our pareidolia, that we tend to see things that are intelligent that aren't intelligent, and therefore we need to design a new sort of test to actually pick out intelligence and not just parroting. What I'm going to show you is I took the first chapter of James Joyce's Ulysses just because I had it available, which contains about 1,100 sentences, 7,000 words, 40,000 plus characters, of which 3,500, about 9%, are the letter E, and only 24 are X's and J's. So text has certain statistical properties. So this is just the first few lines of Ulysses. You don't have to read that, not important. But what I'm now going to do is start generating text based on that chapter using statistical properties and only using statistical properties. So here, this is just generating a character based on the likelihood of it turning up in English. So there are, in other words, 9% of E's here and hardly any X's and J's. So as you can see, there's next to nothing that looks like English there, even though it's got the same statistical build-up. There's nothing there that looks like English. But there are other properties. For instance, certain letters can only be followed by other letters. So, for instance, a Q is only ever followed by a U. And a Z is, at least in this example, only followed by E, I, O, Y, and Z. So what I do is I select a character at random, and then the next character I select at random from the possible characters that can follow that character. So all of a sudden it looks a bit more English. I mean, it's sort of more than that previous example. You can see a couple of words. I think you can see the word and our. You can see the word the, but it's still not English. But okay, so we've done this with pairs of characters. Let's do it with triplets. And now all of a sudden it's really beginning to look more and more like English. So this is with triplets, and now quadruples. And as you can see, it's looking more and more English. It doesn't make sense yet. Quintuples, and finally sextuples, and there's barely a word there that isn't English. So just using statistical properties of the language, I've been able to generate meaningless sentences, just a bunch of words. But it's interesting to see how quickly it converges onto looking like English. But having done that with characters, now let's do the same with words. So here I've just generated sentences at random, just using words out of the text based on the statistical likelihood that they appeared in the original text. And, well, of course, it looks like English now because all the words are guaranteed English, but the sentences don't make any sense. But just as in the same way we did with characters, we can do it with pairs of words. And it gets more English each time we go further. So triples of words, very much looking like decent English sentences. And by the time we've got to quadruples, because of the small learning set, this is actually just text out of Ulysses. This is just a straight chunk of text. There's nothing new generated there. So if I'd used a larger larger learning set, then I could have gone further. But by quadruples, we've just converged onto Ulysses. So ChatGPT is like this. It's using statistical properties of language, but then writ large. I mean, much more complicated than I've done it, and also using statistical techniques for the related meanings, which is very complicated, and I'm not going to explain to you at all. But what ChatGPT does is it generates text related to what you've typed based on other texts that it's read over the internet. Huge amounts of text. This also explains why we sometimes get such weird images. Now, this is the top half of a generated picture of Taylor Swift, which, you know, looks, there's no problems there. I'm now going to show you the bottom part of this image, and you will see something odd about it. She's got one too many fingers, and that's because AI programs actually don't count. And so the syntax of a finger is that it's next to another finger. And so you're likely to get too many or too few fingers. But the nightmare comes when I put these two halves together. It's the stuff of nightmares, right? So, I mean, this explains why you get such weird images, because bits are just put together because they match, and it generates stuff that doesn't look right to us. In the same way that my generated text sometimes looks so weird because I was just generating based on statistical properties. So ChatGPT and similar programs are learning systems. They get fed huge amounts of text, and from that they learn. They're not taught. But you can also teach language. AI can be split into taught systems and learning systems. So what would taught language look like? Well, it's hard. It's even harder than the noughts and crosses example, because you have to define what language looks like. You have to encode language. This is really hard. So you write grammars like this, and then let it generate sentences. So let me give you an example. We saw the program Elisa earlier. Well, I wrote a version of Elisa myself, and then I wrote a patient for Elisa, which was a paranoid patient who would only produce paranoid ravings, and then and then I wanted to see how Eliza responded to that. A sentence is something like person opines something, and then I say what a person is. My sister, the man next door, or whatever. Opines is despises, hates, and so on. And so then I set them to each other. So here's an example of Eliza talking with that patient. So Eliza is a generative program, and so is the patient. So you think I'm stupid. Do you think stupid is a good trait or a bad one? Stupidity. My mother hates jogging. And your father? You think I'm ugly. Me? My girlfriend thinks I'm stupid. How do you get on together? My father loves kissing with my girlfriend. Tell me more about your family. I like relationships. What are your interests? You think I'm boring. Boredom's only in the mind. So these are generated sentences from taught language. It's at least you can determine why it comes out with the sentence that it does, and it hasn't learnt it from anywhere else. So that's the end of the first part, where I talk about the fact that the current things that we call AI are not AI at all. There's no I in them at all. They're not intelligent. And what I now want to talk about briefly is what will happen when generalized intelligence finally appears. So clearly we're in an arms race that companies and countries are all throwing huge amounts of money into trying to produce things that really are intelligent, when there really is an I in AI. And the question is, when will it happen? Will it happen in our lifetimes? And what will happen when computers are finally more intelligent than us? So when will it happen? Well, so accelerating change. My grandfather, born at the end of the 19th century, was born in a world with really only two technologies that we would call, in any sense, modern. Trains and photography. You might want to call flushing toilets modern technology if you want, and then it was three. But there wasn't much in his world that we would now recognize as modern. But in his life of nearly 100 years, he saw vast numbers of paradigm shifts in how we view the world because of changes in technology. So he saw electricity. I mean, when he was born, he was responsible in his house for filling the oil lamps with oil. So they didn't have electric lights. They didn't have any electricity. The telephone, lifts, central heating, cars, film, radio, television, recorded sound, flight, electronic money, computers, space travel. It's an enormous list of new technologies that changes how you view the world. And of course, it didn't stop when he died. I mean, they're still going on, and we're seeing major new shifts as well. Mobile telephones, GPS, cheap computers that can understand and talk back to us, self-driving cars. Again, the list is going on and on. And the question is, does that mean that paradigm shifts, technology changes like this, are happening faster and faster? If he was born with 2 or 3 technologies, and now we've got dozens of these things, maybe hundreds, does it mean they're happening faster and faster? And the answer is yes. So Kurzweil did some research in this, did an investigation, and what he asked was a number of experts in different domains, disciplines, to identify the paradigm shifts in their domain. So, for instance, if it was metallurgy, then, you know, we had a Bronze Age and an Iron Age and so on. And what he wanted to know is, when did those changes happen and how long to the next change? And then he asked, a dozen or 15 different people. And so here's the graph of what the responses he got. So this is how long ago it happened. So this is us basically now, sort of. So this is how long ago it happened. So that's 10 to the power of 11, so long time ago. And this is the time to the next event in the paradigms. Now, there's a very clear line going down there, which means that technological changes are happening exponentially, fast. They're getting faster and faster. And of course, at some point, fairly soon by the looks of things, it's going to reach the x-axis. So what does exponential rate mean? Well, it means, for instance, if they once happened every 100 years, then after 100 years, they happen every 50 years. And then after that 150 years, they happen every 25 years, and so on. So let's just look at what that means. So here we have time naught, where the paradigm changes are happening every 100 years, which is 365 days, in other words. So 100 years later, they're happening every 50 years. And then 50 years, they're every 25 years. And then after 25 years, they're happening 12.5 years, and so on, all the way down to, by the time you get to 200 years, they're happening daily. Now, how can this possibly be? What can this possibly mean? How is this even possible? Now, the funny thing is, this has already happened once before. In the 60s, we already knew that the amount of information being generated by the world was doubling every 15 years, doubling every 15 years. And it had been doing that for at least 300 years. So in the 60s, people sort of knew this had to stop fairly shortly because there weren't enough trees to represent all that data. So it would have to come to a stop. But in fact, what happened instead was the internet happened. And in fact, it speeded up, if anything. It didn't slow down. The internet allowed this to actually happen even faster. So while this may look crazy, we have been through this once before. So how is it possible that this might happen? And one theory is that when it happens daily, that's because that's the point that computers have become smarter than us, and that computers are starting doing the design rather than we as humans doing it. So if that's the case, and it looks like we're working as hard as possible to get to the world where we've got computers as intelligent as us, it means that shortly there will be other things on this earth, for the first time, smarter than us. And not just a bit more intelligent, because, of course, they'll be able to make themselves more intelligent all the time, but 10, 100, 1,000, maybe even 1,000,000 times smarter than us. Well, they'll be really very, very smart. So, will they be self-aware? Possibly. If so, that raises new ethical problems, because will it be okay then to switch them off? And to help you focus your mind on this question, suppose we find a way of encoding your brain and loading it into a computer when you die, into a smart computer when you die. Is it still okay to switch it off? I'm not sure. And of course, these new super intelligent computers, will they be our friends or not? Well, there's no inherent reason that they'll be on our side. Why not? Well, what is our relationship to less intelligent things on Earth? We don't treat them particularly well. If they're useful to us, cows, for instance, well, we might feed them for a while before killing them. If they're not useful, then we really don't care whether they live or die. I mean, you know, we're getting extinctions all the time. Nobody seems to care. And of course, if they're inconvenient, we kill them with no remorse whatsoever. I mean, mosquitoes, for instance. So why would a superintelligence act any differently? So we have a looming AI crisis. So here's a newspaper clipping from 1912. We've known that there's been that there's a coming climate crisis coming. We've known that for more than 100 years. So suppose that computers are no longer in our service. They're much smarter than us. They're connected to the internet, of course, and they learn about the climate crisis. How will they respond? They could feel that threat and therefore look for the source of the climate crisis and see where it is, and work out how to solve that crisis. So I really think we need a plan. We should be thinking about these questions because governments and companies are working as hard as possible to get this sort of intelligence into computers. So we should have a plan for how to deal with it when it arrives, and not just suck it and see if they're our friends or not, because by then it'll be too late. Unfortunately, we respond very slowly. I mean, there's no real sign of us responding to the climate crisis yet, except for recycling our bottles. We respond very slowly, and the same, I'm sure, will happen with the AI crisis when it finally happens. So my conclusion is humans are dreadfully bad at avoiding crises. The question is, which will get us first, the climate or the robots? Or will we finally actually do something about it? Sorry about that. Any questions?
Yes, any questions?
Oh yeah, somebody.
Yes, all right.
All right, thank you. Stephen, thank you very much for the talk. You had a lot of examples with ChatGPT, and you pulled out the questionable aspects of it. I remain pretty impressed. I think if you showed this to me in 2022, I think, yeah, that'll happen in about 10 years. You see where the problems are. I do see a lot of strengths in it. And this is a program that's been trained for maybe in total 5 years, if you can go back to the absolute beginning of the large language model it's trained. How many years do you need to train a human to be able to philosophize about Shakespeare? And also, if you pick a random human from the street and ask them the same question, even in a native English-speaking country, you'll get all sorts of quirky answers. Many of them won't know about iambic pentameter at all. So I don't even know what my question here is, but I wouldn't say ChatGPT is bad. Oh, here's a more specific question, actually. I saw a talk about you recently where you talked about how we tend to look at the document web, the new World Wide Web, in terms of books, and we say, now this isn't really a document, this isn't really information, because you don't have to turn a page to get to the next place. Maybe we'll have a human bias about what intelligence is, and we expect only human intelligence to come, and we get disappointed when we see something that's missing. While on the other side, there are a lot of new non-human intelligences that are coming out that are useful and that happen in very large amounts. So I'm wondering, I wouldn't say anything in the talk was unfair. I think there's also a danger about we don't know what's going to happen and how we can train it. But I get the feeling that ChatGPT is actually doing very well. They do 9 of the 10 things we would expect or hope for, but there's always that one thing where we think, no, it doesn't do that yet. It can't count.
So I'm not sure if your question is, are humans even intelligent? Sorry, people online, if you didn't hear that. So my feeling is that true intelligence needs insight, and that is not yet present in the things that we call intelligent, the machine learning stuff that we have, and that insight would make all the difference. And even stupid humans who wouldn't know what iambic pentameter is, for instance, and that's the difference between knowledge and intelligence. Even those people would be able to have insight.
So in Lord's defense, you know, if you look at standardized intelligence tests, Chat does fabulously, right? I mean, he'd be admitted to the bar at the best places he could go to. He'd probably be admitted to Oxford while you and I wouldn't be. And so that, you know, it seems like I don't know if it's an arrogant definition of intelligence, a human-centric definition of intelligence, a pedantic definition of intelligence. We should ask Chat. But you know you know, it's all how you define it and for what what perspective. And I agree that you can, and I've done it too. You can pick out all sorts of fun examples that the program does stupid things. But I could ask anybody here. I could ask myself all sorts of things, and I'd give stupid responses. Some would be ironic, but some you just don't know. But you've got to fill the sentence. You've got to do something. So I'm not. Although the one thing I like that you said, but I'd love to have an example of if the Turing test doesn't work, and the Turing test can't work because it's not really a test. It's an assumption. It's a feeling that you have. What would work, right? So what do we need as an intelligence test? And it can't be the definition of words because that's easy for a machine to do, and it can't be understanding context because machines could do that too. But what is intelligence, and what makes it a distinctly human property?
I agree. Do you want an answer, or was that just a comment? Well, is yours a question or a comment?
So you're dropping the potato on me. Intelligence. No, that's like a really difficult question that many people have been thinking of for centuries, even before AI, I guess. And perhaps like one comment I want to make is that as soon as we give a formal definition of intelligence, we are defining a new form of stupidity. And there would always be a leak, something that will not fit in that definition. And so if we apply the same definitions like machines do, then we'll end up being stupid in some cases that are not defined in the definition we give. And give a full, complete definition of intelligence should be a paradox for that reason. And on that note, I can suggest what I see as a more promising way to have AI more intelligent than human is us becoming more and more stupid.
Well, other questions?
Another remark, ChatGPT can only say something sensible about Shakespearean sonnets because it has gone through lots of material by scholars about Shakespeare. If you ask it about a subject that it hasn't met, which is very unlikely, perhaps, it can't say anything about it, which provides two use cases. One is a massive spread of disinformation if you train it the right way, according to some people. Another use case I have for myself is I put a lot of my program code into a large language model, and then I let it program just like me, and I keep that model to myself because I can become more effective for my clients, and it programs just as good as I do. And since I'm using some very little used programming languages, no one else can do that. So yeah, it's not really intelligent. It's stochastic parroting.
So I have a question about this what do you call it, the singularity graph by Kurzweil. So you discussed how the amount of information would double over time, and then we would run out of paper and so on. And we've seen this with transistor size as well, like it keeps getting smaller and smaller, right? But we also have counterexamples where it has looked like it's gonna keep going and keep going and but then it doesn't, right? Like, for example, people used to predict in the 60s, in particular, I think, that the global population would just increase and increase until we would breed like rabbits and we would all starve to death, right? But then we found out that with increased, when people get richer, they have fewer kids. And now the projections are that we're gonna, the population is gonna cap off at some point. So do you see any potential scenarios in which this growth, this paradigm shifting at the rate at which this happens slows down? And what would those scenarios be?
I don't yet see it. I mean, the only possible problems would be lack of resources, which I do see as a possible problem. But if you've been to any of my other talks, you know that one of my constant themes is Moore's law. That in 1965, Moore predicted that computers would get twice as powerful every 18 months. well, every year, he said then, and in 1975 he reviewed that and he said, no, it's going to be every 18 months. And since then, I've heard people telling me that we're nearly at the end of that growth. And I heard it first at the end of the 70s, and I've heard it, well, in fact, probably exponentially more times since then. You know, there are some things that really do continue, even though everybody says that they're not going to. So I don't see a scenario for that, especially since now they're putting so much money into exactly the scenario that's predicted.
Stephen, something completely different. I heard that some of my colleagues, they give ChatGPT a lot of compliments always, and they say, "Oh, you really helped me, thank you," and it's so nice that you helped me. Do you think that will make a difference whether they will behave as cows or mosquitoes when they take over the world?
I'm absolutely sure that the ones who are nice to ChatGPT will not be immediately turned into mush when they finally gain control. Yeah.
I had a question relating to the, paradigms or the paradigm shift happening fast and faster. And my thought was, or the first thought I had is it exceeding not just our mental capacity to deal with it, but our psychological capacity? I mean, we see that there's more and more depression, more and more anxiety. People get overwhelmed by the amount of information, and there's only so much that the human mind seems, or the psyche seems to be able to cope with.
Well, yes, but I think there's another thing which is related to the saying, if it's not broke, don't fix it. That we often only respond to something that needs fixing when somebody dies. So I have a road junction just behind my house where everybody was kept saying they ought to do something about that. Somebody's going to get killed. And then a 10-year-old kid gets killed and then they fix it. And I mean, the Delta Works are a similar example, you know, that maybe they should have done something earlier, but, you know, it took several thousands of people to die before they responded. And so I fear that it's our inability to deal with something that might not happen until it actually does happen that is our biggest threat, and that by the time it does happen, it'll be too late, because it won't happen in a small way, it'll happen in a big way. I want to give people the opportunity to leave now if they want, because we have overrun the promised time. So, you know, don't feel you have to sit here. But I'm happy to carry on talking. But you know, I won't be offended if anybody gets up and leaves now, because we've overrun.
So the title says it's about the I in AI, and I thought, well, that's a clever title, because the I doesn't only stand for intelligence, but also for the I, the ego. So what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts of maybe that the danger in AI is maybe more in the design of an autonomy?
Well, yeah. So whether the computers become self-aware or the intelligence will become the problem is that one of, you can't get a learning program to tell why it's done a certain thing. And so the way that they're designing computer intelligences now is modeled on how the brain works. So it's very, very close to the physical things going on in your brain. So we're not in control, really. I mean, they put filters around the outside of it to prevent it these programs saying terrible things. But internally, they're still working in the same way. And so the question is, will we be able to have any control over it at all? That once it's attained sentience, that we won't be able to explain why or how it has. It's just emerged, And how can we filter that, or how can we do anything about it? And the ethical problem is, you know, is this now a life form? How do we, I mean, we don't really know how we define life, but, you know, is it okay now, once it becomes sentient, is it okay to turn it off?
Thanks, Stephen. And I was just wondering if we're sort of, moving in the wrong direction when we're focusing so much on I and AI, because I think that's part of the major problem we have today, because it's actually much of what AI is a we, actually, and not an I, because it's collective intelligences of you and I and everybody else on this planet, which is what is happening in terms of the tensions of why people feel, why isn't our knowledge given fair attribution, fair value, redistributive value? And so I think one of the things is that we see us as oppositional to these technologies versus in relation to with these technologies, right? I mean, there's a deep amount of relationship, the building that happens with AI, whether it's at a very intimate level. And I think intelligence is one of the least interesting aspects of it, because if you think about the way in which knowledge is being processed, very few people are interested in the right answers. I mean, just look at the media, right? They want to know, is this resonating with my community, with my interest, my context? So you may, I think maybe AI in context with my relationship, where I'm at, whether it's political issues, whether it's like, am I a young girl who can't talk about menstruation to any person, which is majority of the world, and then I get on ChatGPT, which actually talks to me about it in a very intimate way. I feel actually it's groundbreaking. It has changed my life, right?
I'm not saying it's not useful, and the AI optimists would say it's going to be a glorious future with AI that is helping us into our future, and my issue is that that's the AI without the I, no intelligence, that it's just machine learning, and I think that's fine. I have no meat with machine learning at all, because it can be useful. It won't have any chance of taking control. It might give us wrong answers. It might be used to spread misinformation. I mean, it's being used for generating false articles for online use. But you can control that sort of stuff. But the moment that it becomes intelligent, then all of a sudden we don't have any control on it, and that's the area where I think that the optimists are too optimistic about, that they think that we'll be able to deal with it.
I don't know if I have an answer, but there's a thought that comes to my mind. Is I read an article about the two people who wrote a book together, using AI and using all the biblical, all the spiritual books, really. And then they started asking this AI all kind of questions. So I think the whole spiritual part is not taken with the AI question and the I in the AI. Because I think that's a part that you can also put into AI.
Yeah, but with machine learning, you've just got a spiritual parrot. I mean, there's no real spirituality there. It's just parroting stuff. So, I mean, you can use these things as a tool, and absolutely.
But then, like, if you go to X, I all the time think like, okay, Elon Musk, I understand why he does it, because he wants to have all the expressions of humans to use it for AI. That's what I think. And it's limitless. That's what his ideas are about. So if he puts a certain control from a spiritual idea on it, or put it also in it, then you can use it in a positive way, by example.
But all those things are already there. I mean, if it's on the internet, then it's been read by ChatGPT, basically. Yeah.
Is our best hope for the future that AI learns to treat us like loving children of elderly, demented parents? That they'll sort of keep us out of harm's way in a location where we're perfectly happy with what we're doing, while things that are a million times more complex than we can understand continue to go on around us? Is that what we hope for at this point? instead of being destroyed or murdered by our children, which is the alternative.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah,
Because-
yeah.
Thanks. No, because I had a similar question actually. I was wondering because you were pointing to this direction, and I was wondering what would be the logic the AI makes its decisions whether to enslave us, kill us, or however, like care about us. Like, yeah, what do you have any idea, like any guess of how a machine would like? Because we couldn't teach them morale to some extent, which goes beyond like what serves themselves, right? For example, we can give them all the major groundworks of ethics and so on, and yeah.
So you're talking about encoding intelligence now, not learning intelligence. And so the question is, how would AI learn ethics, and would they be the same ethics that we have? And our ethics aren't that great actually either. So yeah. I mean, I think it's time to start wrapping up. I mean, we can hang around afterwards, but is there more wine still? Yes. Yes. Then I'm all for it. Ask your question, please.
I would like to go back to the start of your presentation where you referred to noughts and crosses. Was there a specific reason why you started with that? Because you basically outlined like two basic strategies for learning, like rules and states. Did you have in mind that there might be a third way of learning?
So the reason I chose noughts and crosses was, in fact, that's a classic example from the AI literature. It's more or less the first one of the first AI programs ever written, because it's very simple, so that when you want to do an introduction to AI, you can sort of explain the basic elements in a way that people can grasp, because it's something that they've used themselves and actually see results from it happening quickly. So there was no other reason that I picked that than and of course there are other techniques that I haven't covered, but it sort of covers the general streams, as it were. Well, I propose we stop here. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for helping this happen. And let's have some more wine. Yeah, next year again, sure. And thank you everybody who's online for being there. I hope you enjoyed it.
Je bent een keer online geweest.